The papers trembled in her hands, though not because of the wind. The courthouse hallway smelled of dust and old wood, the kind that carried secrets in its grain. Clara Whitmore stood alone beneath the flickering lantern, her white dress too bright for the darkness closing in around her. The ink on the forced marriage contract was still wet. Her father's signature had already sealed her fate. The man waiting inside the judge's chamber was old enough to be her grandfather, rich enough to own half the county, and cruel enough to want her simply because she had said no. Her fingers tightened around the paper as if she could crumple destiny itself. But destiny, she had learned, did not crumple. It tightened like a noose. Outside, hooves thundered against the dirt road. She didn't hear them at first. She was too busy trying to steady her breathing. If she signed, her father's debts would vanish. If she refused, the bank would seize the ranch that had belonged to her mother. That ranch was the last place her mother's ladder still echoed in the barn rafters. Clara's heart was breaking quietly, the way glass cracks before it shatters. The courthouse doors burst open. Dust swirled in like a storm. Every head turned, and there he stood, Rhett Callahan, the most stubborn, infuriating, and dangerously protective cowboy in 3 counties. His hat shadowed his eyes, but everyone knew that look, the look that meant he had already decided how this would end. He didn't remove his gloves, didn't greet the judge, didn't ask permission. He walked straight to Clara. The old suitor inside the chamber sputtered in outrage, demanding law and order. But Rhett didn't look at him. He only looked at Clara. Her wide blue eyes were filled with a fear he had never seen before, and something else, resignation. He took the papers from her trembling hands. The hallway went silent. "Is this what you want?" he asked her quietly. Her throat tightened. She couldn't speak, couldn't betray her father, couldn't betray herself. The old man stepped forward. "That's a legal contract." Rhett tore it in half. The sound was louder than thunder. Then he tore it again, and again. Paper drifted like fallen snow at their feet. "She's mine forever," he said, voice steady as iron. "And no one buys what doesn't belong to them." Gasps rippled through the courthouse. Clara's pulse pounded so hard she thought she might faint. Mine forever. He hadn't asked her, he had claimed her. But in his eyes, there was no ownership, only promise. The judge protested. The old man shouted threats. Clara's father appeared from the chamber, face pale with fury and humiliation. "You've just ruined us," her father hissed. Rhett stepped closer to Clara, placing himself between her and every man in that hallway. "No," he said, "I just saved her." And with that, he took her hand, not forcefully, not possessively, but firmly, and led her out into the blazing afternoon sun. The town watched as he lifted her onto his horse and rode. The wind tore through Clara's hair as the town disappeared behind them. She clutched Rhett's jacket, her heart racing not just from fear, but from the nearness of him. He rode like a man who had already chosen war. The ranch lands rolled endlessly ahead, golden and unforgiving. "You shouldn't have done that," she finally whispered. "I should have done it sooner." The words hit deeper than she expected. Rhett had loved her quietly for years. Everyone knew it, except her father, who considered Rhett reckless and beneath their family name. Clara had kept her distance, believing distance meant safety. But safety had nearly cost her everything. "You don't know what you've started," she said. "Oh, I know exactly," he replied. He wasn't afraid of the banker, or the old suitor, or the gossip that would explode by sunset. What he feared was the look he had seen in her eyes, surrender. He would burn the whole county down before he let her surrender to a cage. They reached the Callahan ranch by dusk. It was rougher than hers, hard-earned, honest, built with sweat instead of inheritance. He helped her down gently. "You don't belong to me," he said suddenly. She blinked in surprise. "I said that back there because they only understand possession. But you don't belong to anyone unless you choose it." Her breath caught. "Then why risk everything?" He stepped closer, close enough that she could feel the heat of him in the cooling air. "Because I'd rather fight the world with you than watch it steal you." Silence stretched between them, heavy, electric. Then distant riders appeared on the horizon, 3 of them. And Clara knew immediately. They had followed. The riders dismounted without greeting. The banker's men, not lawmen collectors. "You interfered with a lawful contract," one of them said. "There are consequences." Rhett didn't step back. Clara felt fear surge again, not for herself but for him. "This isn't your fight," she whispered. He didn't look away from the men. "It's always been my fight." The tallest rider smirked. "The debt stands. If she doesn't marry, the ranch is ours by sunrise." Clara's chest tightened. Her father would lose everything. The land, the cattle, the house her mother painted herself. Rhett's jaw hardened. "How much?" The men exchanged glances. "More than you can pay." Silence fell thick and dangerous. Rhett removed his hat slowly. Then I'll pay it in blood if I have to. Clara grabbed his arm. No, she saw it then, this wasn't just about love. It was about pride, power, ownership. The banker wanted to prove no one defied him. The men mounted again. Sunrise, the leader repeated. Or we take what's owed. They rode away. The sky darkened fully now. Clara turned to Rhett. You can't fight them. He looked at her, eyes blazing with something fierce and unwavering. Watch me. But deep inside, he knew this wasn't a gunfight he could win. This was going to require something far more dangerous, sacrifice. Sleep never came to Clara that night. The Callahan ranch house creaked softly with the sound of old wood settling under cooling desert air. But inside her chest, everything remained restless and burning. She sat near the small window of the guest room Rhett had prepared for her years ago, back when her visits were still welcome and uncomplicated, back when loving him had felt like a dangerous secret rather than an unavoidable truth. Moonlight spilled across the wooden floor, stretching silver shadows toward her bare feet as she hugged her knees, replaying the events of the courthouse again and again. The tearing of the contract still echoed in her ears like thunder refusing to fade. She could still see the fury in her father's face, the humiliation, the betrayal. And yet, she could also feel the steadiness of Rhett's hand when he pulled her out of that building, the certainty in his voice when he declared her freedom. It terrified her how safe she had felt in that moment. Across the hall, Rhett hadn't slept either. He sat at the long kitchen table sharpening a hunting knife he didn't actually need sharpened. The repetitive scrape of metal against stone was the only thing keeping his thoughts from spiraling into darker places. He had declared war against men who didn't lose wars. The banker, Malcolm Pierce, had built his wealth through fear and favors, buying sheriffs, judges, and entire towns when necessary. Rhett knew Pierce didn't just want Clara as a bride for his aging business partner. He wanted to crush the last independent ranches in the valley, and Clara's family land stood directly in the path of his expansion. Saving her had been the easy part. Protecting her from what would follow would be a battle measured in blood and broken alliances. He paused when he heard footsteps behind him. Clara stood in the doorway wrapped in one of his spare shirts, the oversized sleeves swallowing her hands. The sight twisted something deep inside his chest, something he tried desperately to ignore. She looked smaller than usual, but her eyes held the stubborn fire he had fallen in love with when they were barely teenagers racing horses across the open plains. You should sleep, he said quietly without turning fully toward her. I could say the same to you. Silence filled the space between them, heavy with unspoken memories. The kitchen lantern cast golden light across the rough wooden table, highlighting every scar on Rhett's knuckles, every callus earned from years of building a life that no one had handed to him. They'll come at sunrise, she whispered. I know. You might die. He finally turned, then meeting her gaze with unwavering calm. That's always been part of loving you. Her breath caught sharply. The honesty in his voice felt more dangerous than any threat waiting outside the ranch borders. She stepped closer, her bare feet silent against the worn floorboards. I never asked you to love me like that, she said softly. No, he agreed. But you never asked me not to either. The words settled between them like a fragile confession neither of them had the strength to shatter. Outside, the distant howl of a coyote cut through the night, reminding them that dawn was moving closer with every passing heartbeat. Clara reached for the edge of the table, steadying herself as a new wave of fear surged through her chest. There has to be another way. Pierce doesn't just want money. He wants control. If you fight him, he'll destroy everything you've built too. Rhett leaned back in his chair, studying her face carefully. I already decided what I'm willing to lose. And what if that includes your life? She pressed. He stood slowly, towering in front of her, his shadow falling across her like a shield forged from stubborn devotion. Then I'll lose it protecting yours. Tears burned in her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. Clara Whitmore had been raised to stand tall even while her world collapsed around her. Yet standing in front of Rhett now, she felt something crack inside her carefully constructed strength. I don't want to be another reason you bleed, she whispered. His voice softened in a way she had never heard before. You're the only reason I ever learned how to survive pain. Outside, the first pale hint of dawn began bleeding into the sky. The sunrise arrived wrapped in tension thick enough to choke the air. Ranch hands moved nervously across the yard, whispering in low voices while saddling horses and checking rifles they prayed they wouldn't need to use. Rhett's younger brother, Caleb, leaned against the barn door watching Clara as she stepped outside. His expression held equal parts concern and admiration, the look of someone witnessing history unfold in ways that could never be undone. You sure you're ready for this? Caleb asked quietly. Clara straightened her shoulders, lifting her chin with the same quiet dignity her mother had always carried. I'm not the one holding the guns. Sometimes standing your ground takes more courage than pulling a trigger, he replied. Before she could respond, a cloud of dust appeared along the horizon. Riders. More than 3 this time. Clara's pulse hammered violently against her ribs as fear clawed its way through her chest. Rhett stepped beside her, his presence solid and unyielding like a mountain refusing to bow to the storm rolling toward it. He handed her a small revolver, pressing it into her palm gently but firmly. I hope you won't need it, he said. Her fingers trembled around the weapon. And if I do? Then you remember that fear doesn't make you weak, he answered. Running from it does. The riders approached slowly, deliberately, as if savoring the intimidation their arrival created. Malcolm Pierce rode at the center, his tailored black coat untouched by dust, his silver hair glinting beneath the morning sun. His sharp eyes locked onto Clara immediately, calculating and cold. My dear, Pierce called out smoothly as he dismounted. You've caused quite the spectacle. Clara stepped forward before Rhett could stop her. This ends today. Pierce chuckled softly, removing his gloves with precise elegance. Oh, it will, just not the way you're hoping. He gestured, and 2 men dragged Clara's father forward from among the riders. The sight hit her like a physical blow. His face was bruised, his posture broken under the weight of humiliation and regret. You want freedom, Pierce continued calmly. Then pay your family's debt. Otherwise, the ranch becomes mine, and your father answers for breach of contract. Clara's world tilted violently. Leave him out of this. He signed the agreement, Pierce replied coldly. I merely enforce consequences. Rhett stepped forward, every muscle in his body coiled like a drawn bow. Name the amount. Pierce smiled slowly, savoring the moment. You misunderstand. I don't want your money anymore, Callahan. I want your surrender. Silence crashed across the ranch yard. Even the wind seemed to pause, waiting for Rhett's response. Pierce continued, voice smooth as poison. Sell me your land. All of it. Every acre you've bled for. Walk away from ranching forever, and I'll release her family from debt. Clara turned toward Rhett in horror. No! You can't even consider that! But he didn't answer immediately. His gaze remained locked on Pierce, calculating, weighing, sacrificing. The ranch behind him wasn't just land. It was his identity, his history, his future. Giving it up would erase everything he had built with his bare hands. Pierce leaned closer, lowering his voice. Or I take everything from both of you by nightfall. Clara's heart shattered as she realized Pierce had crafted a trap with no honorable escape. The choice wasn't between land and pride. It was between love and survival. The standoff stretched unbearably long, every second tightening like a noose around Clara's lungs. She searched Rhett's face desperately, silently begging him not to trade his entire life for hers. But she already recognized the decision forming in his eyes, the same relentless determination he had carried since the day they met. The same unstoppable loyalty that terrified and comforted her in equal measure. You can rebuild a ranch, Pierce said smoothly, sensing victory. But you can't rebuild the dead. Clara grabbed Rhett's arm, her fingers digging into his sleeve. Listen to me. If you give this up, you'll lose yourself. I won't let you destroy your life for mine. His gaze finally shifted to her, softening in a way that made her chest ache. Clara, my life has always been you. The ranch was just where I waited for you to realize it. Tears blurred her vision. That's not love, that's martyrdom. No, he whispered gently. It's choice. He turned back to Pierce. Draw up the transfer. Gasps erupted among the ranch hands. Caleb cursed under his breath, slamming his fist against the barn wall. Clara felt her knees weaken as the full weight of Rhett's sacrifice crashed over her like a tidal wave she couldn't escape. Pierce smiled, satisfied and predatory. Wise decision. As his men began preparing documents, Clara stepped backward, her entire world spinning violently. She couldn't let this happen. Couldn't allow Rhett to erase himself to save her family's mistakes. The realization struck her with sudden clarity. Pierce wanted control, power, ownership. But power only existed when people surrendered to it. Clara wiped her tears fiercely and stepped forward, her voice cutting through the tension like lightning splitting the sky. Stop. Every head turned toward her. She faced Pierce directly, her posture rigid with newfound strength. You don't want the ranch. You want submission. You want proof that you can break anyone. Pierce raised an amused eyebrow. And you're wrong, she said steadily. She turned toward Rhett, her heart racing with terrifying certainty. You once told me I don't belong to anyone unless I choose it. His expression shifted, confusion flickering beneath his hardened resolve. Well, she continued, voice trembling but unbroken. I choose you. Not because you saved me. Not because you sacrificed everything. I choose you because I love you, and I won't let you destroy your life trying to protect mine." Silence fell so heavy it felt sacred. Pierce scoffed impatiently. "Romantic speeches don't erase debt, girl." Clara met his gaze fearlessly. "No, but truth can destroy fear." She stepped beside Rhett, intertwining her fingers with his. "You can take land, you can threaten families, but you cannot force loyalty, and you cannot buy love. And if you think this valley will stand with a man who destroys 2 families to feed his greed, you're about to learn how alone power really is." Murmurs began spreading among the ranch hands, then among Pierce's own hired riders. Uncertainty flickered across their faces as Clara's defiance ignited something larger than fear. Pierce's smile faltered for the first time, and in that fragile moment the balance of power began to shift. The air changed after Clara spoke. It was subtle at first, like the moment before a storm breaks when pressure shifts and even the birds fall silent. Malcolm Pierce noticed it immediately. His men noticed it too, though they tried to mask their unease behind hardened expressions and tightened grips on their reins. Power, Clara realized, was fragile when it depended on fear alone, and fear had just begun to crack. Pierce's smile returned, but it no longer reached his eyes. "You misunderstand your position," he said smoothly, brushing imaginary dust from his sleeve. "This isn't a town meeting. This is business. Contracts don't dissolve because a girl found her courage." Clara held her ground, her fingers still woven with Rhett's. His hand was warm and solid, anchoring her while her heart thundered violently in her chest. She wasn't fearless. Every nerve in her body screamed with terror, but she refused to step back. Not now. Not after seeing the cost Rhett was willing to pay for her freedom. "You're right," she said quietly. "Contracts don't dissolve because of courage." Pierce's expression sharpened with satisfaction. "They dissolve because of law," she finished. Confusion flickered across several faces. Even Rhett turned slightly toward her, surprised. Clara drew a slow breath, steadying herself as memories surfaced. Long afternoons spent beside her mother at the ranch office, learning numbers and ledgers while her father negotiated cattle trades. Her mother had always insisted she understand the legal language that governed land and debt. At the time, Clara had considered it dull and unnecessary. Now it felt like the only weapon she had left. "My father signed a contract under financial coercion," she said clearly, her voice gaining strength with every word. "You threatened foreclosure before the agreed repayment deadline. You altered payment interest twice without written consent. That violates territorial trade law." Pierce laughed, but it sounded forced. "You expect anyone here to care about technicalities?" "I expect the circuit judge arriving tomorrow to care," Clara replied. The ranch yard fell silent again. Pierce's jaw tightened slightly. "There is no judge coming." "There is," Clara said firmly. "My mother sent a letter 3 weeks ago requesting review of our loan terms after the second interest change. The judge confirmed he'd inspect the contract personally. He was delayed by weather, but he arrives tomorrow afternoon." Rhett stared at her, shock mixing with fierce pride. He hadn't known. No one had known. Pierce's composure cracked almost invisibly, but Clara saw it. She saw the calculation behind his eyes shift, searching for new control. "You're lying," he said flatly. Clara met his gaze without blinking. "Then stay. If you're certain you've done nothing wrong, you have nothing to fear from legal review." The tension stretched like a wire pulled to its breaking point. Pierce's riders exchanged uneasy glances. Many of them weren't loyal to Pierce personally, they were loyal to money. And money had no interest in standing beside a losing gamble. Pierce stepped closer, lowering his voice so only Clara and Rhett could hear. "Even if what you're saying is true, court battles take months. During those months, accidents happen. Ranches burn, cattle vanish, people disappear." A chill ran through Clara's spine, but she didn't retreat. Instead, Rhett stepped forward slightly, placing himself between them, his presence radiating a quiet, dangerous promise. "Then you'd better pray nothing happens," Rhett said coldly, "because if it does, I won't wait for courtrooms." Pierce studied him carefully, weighing risk against reward. For the first time, uncertainty settled across his expression like a shadow he couldn't outrun. Finally, he stepped back. "We'll see what tomorrow brings," he said smoothly, though the confidence in his tone had thinned. With a sharp motion, he signaled his riders. Dust exploded beneath hooves as they turned and rode away, retreating toward the horizon with far less certainty than when they had arrived. The moment they disappeared, Clara's legs nearly collapsed beneath her. Rhett caught her instantly. The ranch yard erupted into chaotic relief once Pierce's men vanished from sight. Caleb let out a breath that sounded like he'd been holding it since sunrise, while several ranch hands removed their hats and wiped sweat from their foreheads. But Rhett barely noticed the celebration around him. His attention remained fixed entirely on Clara as he helped her sit on the porch steps. "You should have told me," he said softly. "I wasn't sure it would matter," she admitted, her voice trembling as adrenaline drained from her body. "I only found the letter 2 days before the courthouse signing. My mother must have hidden it in the office ledger after she got sick." The mention of her mother softened something inside Rhett's chest. He remembered the strong, wise woman who had once predicted Clara would either save or destroy every man who loved her. "You just saved us both," he said. Clara shook her head slowly. "Not yet. Pierce won't give up easily. Men like him don't retreat, they regroup." Rhett nodded, knowing she was right, but something had shifted. For the first time since tearing those marriage papers, hope flickered stronger than dread. Later that evening, Clara walked alone through the Callahan pasture, the sky glowing in deep orange streaks as the sun dipped behind distant hills. The land stretched endlessly before her, wild, unpolished, stubbornly beautiful. It mirrored Rhett in ways she had never fully appreciated until now. She heard his boots approach before she turned. "You always come out here when you're thinking too hard," he said. She smiled faintly. "You remember that?" "I remember everything about you." The honesty in his voice made her chest ache again. She turned to face him fully, the golden sunset painting warm light across his weathered features. "You were really going to give up the ranch," she said quietly.
"Yes, no hesitation."
"None." Clara studied him carefully, searching for regret, but she found none, only certainty steady and unbreakable. "That scares me," she admitted. "Why?" "Because loving someone shouldn't require losing yourself." Rhett stepped closer, his gaze softening. "I wouldn't have lost myself. I would have chosen a different version of myself. One where you were safe." Her throat tightened as tears finally slipped down her cheeks. "I don't want you to become smaller just so I can breathe easier." He reached out, brushing a tear from her cheek with calloused fingers surprisingly gentle. "Clara, loving you never made me smaller. It made me stronger than I ever thought possible." The wind whispered through the tall grass around them, carrying the scent of earth and freedom. She leaned into his touch without hesitation now, no longer afraid of what it meant. "I love you," she whispered. The words settled between them like a sacred vow neither of them needed repeated. Rhett closed the distance, pressing his forehead gently against hers. "I've loved you since you beat me in that horse race when we were 16. She laughed softly through her tears. "You let me win." "Never," he said with a faint smile. "I just realized losing to you felt better than winning against anyone else." For the first time since the courthouse, Clara felt peace bloom inside her chest, fragile, but real. The next afternoon arrived with suffocating anticipation. The entire valley seemed to hold its breath as the circuit judge's carriage rolled into town under heavy escort. Word spread quickly, drawing townspeople toward the courthouse steps where Malcolm Pierce stood waiting with carefully masked composure. Clara stood beside Rhett across the street, her hand resting firmly in his. Her father stood behind them, bruised but standing taller than he had the previous day. Regret lingered in his eyes, but so did pride. "I should have trusted you," he said quietly to Clara. She squeezed his hand gently. "We're standing now. That's what matters." Inside the courthouse, the hearing stretched for hours. Ledgers were examined. Contracts were dissected line by line. Pierce's lawyers argued fiercely, but Clara's evidence, her mother's hidden records, altered interest rates, unsigned amendments, painted a clear picture of manipulation. By late afternoon, the verdict arrived. The judge ruled the marriage contract void due to financial coercion and declared Pierce's loan agreement under legal investigation for fraud and predatory enforcement. The courtroom erupted in whispers and stunned silence as Pierce's empire of intimidation fractured publicly for the first time in decades. His wealth remained, but his untouchable reputation shattered like glass beneath a hammer. Outside, Clara and Rhett stood beneath the courthouse steps as townspeople gathered, murmuring in relief and admiration. Pierce exited moments later, his expression cold and hollow as he passed them without a word. His power had not vanished, but it had been wounded, and men like him feared wounds more than defeat. As the crowd dispersed, Clara turned toward Rhett, sunlight catching the determination in her eyes. "What happens now?" she asked. He glanced toward the horizon, where both ranches stretched across open land waiting to be fought for, protected, and built into something stronger than fear. "Now," he said slowly, "we rebuild everything they tried to break." She smiled, stepping closer. "Together. Forever," he answered. Weeks passed and the valley slowly returned to its steady rhythm. Clara split her time between the Whitmore Ranch and Callahan land, helping restructure finances and operations with the sharp intelligence her mother had always nurtured. Rhett worked beside her, their partnership blending stubborn independence with unshakable loyalty. One evening, as the sun melted into amber shadows across the prairie, Rhett led Clara to the hill overlooking both ranches, land once divided by pride and tradition, now connected by something stronger. He removed his hat, running a nervous hand through his dark hair. "I never asked you properly," he admitted. She tilted her head, smiling softly. "Asked me what?" He reached into his pocket, pulling out a simple silver ring shaped like a braided rope, strong, unbroken, and enduring. "Not because I think you belong to me," he said quietly, "but because I want to belong to you. Every sunrise, every storm, every quiet night like this." Clara's heart swelled as tears blurred her vision again, but these tears carried warmth instead of fear. She extended her hand without hesitation. "Yes," she whispered. As he slipped the ring onto her finger, the wind swept across the open valley, rustling grass and carrying the scent of earth, freedom, and beginnings forged through fire. She rested her head against his shoulder, watching the last light fade across the horizon. Once those lands had represented debt, power, and control. Now they represented choice, and love chosen freely was stronger than any contract ever written.